Hi, I'm Kacey.
And I'm Gianni.
I never finished reading the Animorphs books as a kid, and I still haven't as an adult.
And I've never read them.
We can't tell you where we live.
But we can tell you that we want to revisit these books as adults and dive into what we would keep or change if we were to put it on TV.
Two friends, 50-something books. Welcome to Morphin Buddies.
And then the music kicks in, and then people are just so ready.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Morphin Buddies. Today, we've got me, Kacey Cisnowski, your ever-enchanting host, and my co-host, Mr. Gianni DeMaia!
Woo! And the crowd goes wild.
Wow, I can hear them shouting and screaming.
Yeah, guys, calm down. You're not going to be able to
Everybody
hear the
calm
podcast
down.
over that.
So, we are on book 3 of the Animorph series called The Encounter. Gianni,
yeah.
what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts before we start?
So we're following Tobias this time, finally.
Mm-hmm.
The goat. Some have called him. This was, I think. By the way, this crazy siren only happens when we start recording, so I apologize if you guys hear that.
I barely hear it, to be fair.
I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but by a small margin. I don't want to be hyperbolic. By a small margin, though, this is my favorite of the books we've read so far in the series. I think solely because it felt the most, I guess compelling would be the word in regards to the character development that we're actually deriving out of our protagonist. This was the farthest bridge away from, I guess, a normal... None of this is normal, obviously, with science fiction series, but it's the farthest bridge away from the typical sort of teenage experience being like thrown into this ability or whatever. Because obviously with the things that have happened in the past, I know we're in a spoiler-free section of this book, but I could talk about the past books, right, at this point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we all know that Tobias is stuck in his little bird body, and getting inside his head, this was exactly kind of what I wanted for the character development of a book focusing around Tobias, because particularly in the middle sections of the book, and it's funny because the middle sections, I think, of the past two books kind of have that lull period where they try to find where to get to in the plot. And in this book, it was my favorite part of the book because I think the overarching plot was the least interesting part of the encounter in particular.
I totally agree.
But the consequential moments of how it sort of defines Tobias and how he's grappling with particularly what it means to be human. I was like, wow, this is some big, heavy themes that we're really broaching here. And it felt more consequential and more thematically relevant, I think, than anything that had happened in the other two books. So I really liked this one. Again, by a small margin, I'd say this is my favorite, but this is definitely my favorite. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I was going to totally agree with you. If you want any book that defines teenage angst, this is absolutely the book. But it does it in such a way that kids can see it and relate to it, and I feel like adults can also see it and understand it, and it doesn't feel like kid-like. It doesn't feel like it's talking down to you in any way. And I personally love the push and pull kind of stages that Tobias goes through, where it's like, I'm a bird, but I'm a person, but I'm a bird, but I want to do person things, but I also have these new instincts of the hawk that I'm dealing with, and I really loved that back and forth within this book. The eternal internal struggle was great. So I really love that about the book. Yeah, I also agree, plot-wise, didn't completely love it, but all the character work within really helped keep everything together, and focus solely on Tobias. And just feel so bad for him.
I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. He's such an angsty little boy, but God's so easy to root for because you get those pieces, again, as spoiler free as I can be for this section of the podcast anyway. You get those elements of I think something that I felt really related to my sort of teenage experience, and you're like you feel like your depression is like so insurmountable, right?
Yes, like, you're the only one.
I like no one can truly understand how it feels, and I loved it especially too because harkening back to what we were talking about with the second book in particular, and all my beef with Jake, and
Jake,
how he is constant. They even bring it up in this book about that concept of kind of losing your mind a little bit to the animal instincts in a morph, and how Tobias grapples with it exponentially more, but complains about it exponentially less than fucking Jake, because he's a relatable person who's actually, I think, good-hearted and good-natured and trying to do good. And then you get to some of the more consequential moments in that middle section with a particular thing that Tobias has, like, it sort of does on instinct or on animal impulse, and how he grapples with that just truly feels, even though again it's a completely, but this is like art reflects life kind of thing, it's a circumstance that none of us will ever be in, but the way that Applegate kind of writes it and maneuvers it makes it feel like such an ingrained emotion in the typical teenage experience. We've all had those days where you're like, I am the only person going through this. And obviously it's not true, but it's the sort of emotional response that feels so relevant. And it's something that this book I just think absolutely nails. When you talk about the encounter, I think moving forward, this will be, I think, the high point of the series' character development, perhaps the low point of the plot. But this is now the bar, I think, that I'm expecting moving forward. And not just for Tobias either. I want to also give a shout out to Rachel, because I think this book does a good job of actually having a female character that is basically the confidant to Tobias, and very much bounces off him in a way that feels really romantic and sweet, but also like really angsty and endearing in that regard as well.
And they also feel like the most mature members of the group, even though if I'm like talking about these kids and I'm like, who would I think is the most mature, I feel like Tobias is number one. He seems the most emotionally intelligent out of all these kids, and I think I probably wouldn't think of Rachel as second, but the way that she interacts with Tobias really reveals an interesting inner layer with her character that I really appreciated. So it's not just the boy that's emotionally intelligent. It's also this girl that everyone thinks of her as a model. Everyone thinks of her as like gymnastics girl. She's going to do something great. But they don't necessarily think of her for her intellect necessarily. And I really appreciate that nuance between the characters. So, yeah.
Even how it defines Marco, I liked far more than it did in the second book.
Yeah.
Because obviously the second book is kind of introducing us more to the character dynamics that we're going to expand on over the course of the series. And I felt like where in the second book it may have been a bit forced with some of the Marco like just being a kind of stick in the mud and misogynistic. This one felt much more natural, and I think because of the perspective that we're seeing it through, because the things that Marco is rebuking in like the actions that Tobias does or the plans of the group or what have you, they are valid points. And Tobias can even recognize where there's valid argument to it. So it feels much more natural when he's just being kind of the pessimist of the group and just sort of rebuking the idea of what their role is with these new powers. So I just appreciate kind of the full gambit of the character development of these characters here. I think that, the encounter just really worked for me. Again, even though I don't think I'm going to remember anything about the plot itself. Like, I think this will maybe be our most boring regaling of the plot here in a couple of minutes, because there's really not anything of consequence that happens.
Not a ton.
All of the meat is just in what you get out of the actual character, which is what I wanted from a Tobias book.
Yeah. So why don't we get started? Let me get my door real quick. My cat is begging to be let in. Oh, I open the door and he goes into his box. So, you know, story of living with a cat. All right, Gianni.
Well, living with an animorph.
Mr. Gianni, let's get started with this plot. Why don't you start us off with Tobias and how he's feeling at the beginning of this book?
Okay, so sad boy Tobias
Saddest
kicks us
boy.
off in our typical way. He's so sad.
So he forgot
so
what color his eyes were. He forgot what color his eyes were.
Blonde hair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now he's just a bird.
Now he's just a bird.
And man, he is like just going through it.
Ugh.
And he sees this other little bird caught in this little cage, this little bird cage.
Other red-tailed hawk.
He has the impulse. He's like, I need to save this bird. Because really what this book is, if we're getting into spoilers, this book is horny. And
horny
he is horny for some bird tail. You know what I'm saying? Dude?
But he doesn't even realize it.
He's like, oh, I don't want to be in love with a bird, but he's kind of like, ooh, he's feeling a little bit of
I can't
warm
turn
and
away.
Fuzzy.
I can't turn away.
My feathers are fluttering. You know what I mean? And so he sees this bird in this cage. He's like, I gotta help this bird. Mm-hmm. It's this. I guess it's some sort of show.
It's a car lot shooting a live commercial, I guess.
Yes.
And they have, because it's like they have a hawk in their name, they captured a red-tailed hawk, and they have her in a cage, and they're like rattling the cage around to make her do something. And Tobias is like, that's not right. Also, I love her.
Yeah. Based. So Tobias is like, so I guess this is how all of the books are going to start now. Is this just going to be like regular ass people doing shitty things, and then like the animorphs come in and like save them in like some incremental way.
Yeah.
So he comes, he breaks the bird out of the cage, and as he's doing it and he's causing the whole stink and so many people are seeing, Rachel decides to pop on in, and she decides, oh, I know exactly what can be really subtle as a way to help him out. I'll turn into an elephant. And so
as a distraction to get him away from the hawk.
And of course it works because an elephant is now in the car lot. Yes. And so they cause a whole ruckus. The whole time they're talking to each other, they're like, Marco's going to be so pissed. And sure enough, as soon as they see Marco, he's like, what the fuck? Like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Why did you do this? And brings some valid points. Even Jake is like, Jake. But even Jake, the ipso facto leader of the group, I guess, begrudgingly so, even Jake says that, you know, obviously this is not something that we should really entertain more often.
Focus
because
on.
Because we're already in hot water. Obviously all of the Yeerks are already looking for us. All of these alien species are already looking for the Andalites that are causing a ruckus. And naturally seeing an elephant in a fucking car lot as they try to break out a bird is going to raise some hair. So maybe this is not the smartest move for us to be sort of under the radar. And Tobias is like, heard, chef. But then, you know, flutters off to do his own thing. And as he's flying around one day, he's taking a casual stroll. He's having his moody boy thoughts, as one does.
Actually, can I bring up a quick point here?
Oh,
so this is what I was thinking. Well, Tobias is in his mind thinking like, I'm a hawk, I'm a boy, I'm a hawk, I'm a boy. What am I? A thought popped into my brain that was like, Tobias is a hawk. Does he now have the lifespan of a hawk?
Ooh. That's
because he's in
what
morph.
Is the lifespan of a hawk?
So I looked this up. Normally, in the wild, red-tailed hawks live about 10 to 20 years.
Oh, shit.
They can live up to 30 years in captivity. So even though that sounds like a long time, even if he got like the body of a young hawk, does he only live to 30? Or is he trapped in this age forever because of the DNA he acquired? Does it age?
Ooh, yeah, we gotta address that question. That's like,
right?
Now that you've brought this up, this is now forefront of my mind. Moving forward, this has now become the number one plot point I need addressed immediately.
I mean, like, he can't be immortal, right?
We're in a race against the clock at this point. You're absolutely right. That's crazy.
So even if he lives the full 30 years as a hawk, that's still only half his real lifespan as a human being.
Dude, that's nothing, man. You know, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, was 89 years old at the events of the Two Towers. And let me tell you, okay, they talked a lot about how horrible it would be when he passed away because he was still immortal. 89 years? If I live 89 years, shoot me in the fucking head, okay? That's a super long time. I'm ready to be euthanized at that point.
He also looked
30
fantastic.
Years? That's crazy.
Yeah, 30 years. Like
he looked exceptional.
That shot where he's opening up the doors and his wet hair is by his face. Boy, stop.
Stop. Okay, stop.
We gotta slow down here.
This is gonna become the horniest podcast of all time.
Dang it, Tobias, you brought it out of us.
All right.
But yeah, you have to imagine at some point that hawk body's got to break down. It's not gonna live forever. So even more sad stuff added on top of the story. Anyway, Tobias is flying around. He notices something weird in the sky. He's like, what's that wiggly thing? What is that? And it turns out he stumbles upon a invisible Yerk ship that has a cloaking device over it. That's just floating over the city like a giant stingray. Terrifying.
Yeah. Guess it couldn't fit underground, this one.
Yeah.
You know, who am I to judge? But yes.
And he watches it go to a lake, suck up some water with a tube, like a giant tube, and then fly away. And he's like, that's weird.
Important to note.
Weird.
So he pops on back to his friends. He tells them what he saw. Immediately they have the idea. They're like, we gotta go investigate. We gotta get up into the mountains and investigate this. But the problem is they all have bird morphs, or most of them do, but they're all different birds. So they're like, that would be a little suspicious. They're already looking for the Andalites. They're going to see different birds all hanging out together. They're going to be like, what the fuck is that? Right? Here's what we do. We get a wolf. We become a wolf pack. We pack together. We rummage on up. We inspect. And then we get out of Dodge. Perfect plan. So, they get a wolf.
Well, they have two wolves.
Does Cassie become the wolf first?
I think so, yes. Cassie, I think, has two wolves in a barn, a male and a female. And this is where the outdated science facts come in, because they're like, only one person can morph the male wolf because he's the alpha. Actually, we found out that whole alpha wolf study completely made up by the guy who put it out. He made it all up. So many scientists have studied wolves since then, and they're like, actually, none of that is true. We have not observed any evidence pointing to that study being real. So the alpha wolf stereotype, not true. Alpha boy podcast, stop. It's a lie. Shouldn't listen to those anyway. They're terrible, but their whole persona built upon a lie. So just, I thought that was really interesting, seeing how science developed since then.
That's brilliant. I actually didn't know that either, but that's super, super funny.
Yeah.
I would like to let everybody know that subtly over the course of the past few episodes, we have been slowly indoctrinating you. This is the Alpha Wolf podcast.
Yes,
and also
welcome.
We are menaced, and we. Oh, that's one thing I wanted to say that I forgot to say.
What?
Way more onomatopoeias in this book than I was expecting.
Absolutely.
Like a lot.
Absolutely.
There's always a couple in the past too, but I was like,
Zing.
oh, this is a lot.
But dang. Yeah.
Constantly.
Sear.
He's always doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, woo, 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 woo. But yeah, so they become the wolves.
Yes.
They rummage on up to the mountains. Then I get a little lost here, Casey.
I think
but
this
for
is
some
where
reason, they kind of got stuck because they were going after a rabbit. Is that right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So they go up as wolves. They all see the invisible spaceship sucking up water into the ship. They start coming back because they see the place is crawling with controllers. And then they run into a second wolf pack. And then it's a standoff.
That's where I got confused. Because I was like, wait, what? That wasn't them? It's a totally different.
It's a second wolf pack. And the Animorphs are encroaching on the territory of the second wolf pack, which is a big old no-no in the animal world. So they are literally at a standoff, like one of them's about to go after the other. It's scary. They can't back down because then the wolf pack will attack them. So they're stuck in that situation. Then Tobias grabs a rabbit away from, I think it was on the ground between the two packs, and neither were going to go after it. And so Tobias grabs the rabbit, flies it by the face of the wolf pack, whose territory they're in, and then they chase the rabbit while Tobias is hanging on to it. That gets the Animorphs to be able to run away and demorph. And then Tobias gets like a sudden reality check. His brain kind of snaps a little bit and he maybe attempts suicide, where he's like zooming to the ground as fast as he can. That's not the first time it'll happen. It's not the second time no, I'm sorry. That's the first time it happens in this book. It will not be the last time he attempts suicide in this book. He gets caught up.
Yeah, he's kind of going through it, this is where the book really starts to win me over personally, because it was so. What I liked too was the restraint of Applegate, to not have to really elaborate on it too much. There's like a really simple trick that she does where she just has Tobias acknowledge. So it's a buzzer beater first of the wolves all demorphing.
Yeah.
And they're barely able to get out before
they get stuck halfway through, and Tobias is like, guys, come on, focus. And then finally they're slowly able to get back. Yeah.
And right when they get out, all Applegate really says from Tobias's perspective is just like, I didn't want to be there anymore, and then flies away. And I was like, oh, hard hitting. My angsty boy is feeling so angsty. You know what I mean? He's just going through it. And yeah, you're right. He like kind of low key almost commits suicide, decides not to. Like,
and then
all right, that's
who does he fly over to talk deep thoughts into the night?
I literally don't remember.
Miss Rachel.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. I was like, wait, was there a scene that I forgot? But that's
Rachel.
when this happens. So so they link up, and this is where she has like a lot of really beautiful sentiments about, you're still you as long as you have us, as long we're sort of your family or whatever. It kind of falls on deaf ears at this point. Tobias is still kind of going through it. It's not until later where they kind of have a full circle of this conversation that it really kind of connects. But it is these sort of really beautiful sentiments just about him not, you haven't lost your way. This is also around this time is when Tobias starts talking about how he's made a really active effort to not indulge in the animal instincts because he constantly feels them sort of taking over.
Right. So no eating wild animals, no hunting all day.
Which is like super important.
Jake feeds him from his attic, essentially, and keeps him in a drawer.
Yeah, and Jake won't stop talking about his fucking lizard experience climbing a river. World's smallest violin for the biggest prick of the bunch. But he's been feeding from his attic. I think it's also around this time where Tobias sees the other hawk again, the hawk that he had freed, and they're kind of doing a little dance,
a little flying together, a little hanging out.
They're doing a little flirty McGurdy up in the sky, and he's talking to himself, and he's like, I'm not into birds, but there's something about this girl.
This bird.
He doesn't say that at all, but that's totally what the sentiment is.
Yeah.
Like, there's something about this bird that's just getting me.
He's like
getting me fluttering.
I don't find her to be foul.
Oh! Straight to jail. With you.
So I guess they meet up. They decide, we're going to try to decloak this invisible ship so everybody sees it and everybody can talk about it, and the Yeerks are going to get exposed. Awesome. Another part in this book, Marco's sexist as hell. Pissed me off. He was like,
he can't help himself.
He was like, oh, remember the good old days when all girls could do was call you a name? And I was like, ew, Marco.
Like, what is your problem? What is your damage?
Aren't you like 12 or 13? Shut up.
Yeah, what did women do to you at this point in your life, sir?
Literally nothing. That's why he's mad.
Insane. Craziness. Yeah, this is exactly the type of dude who like doesn't go to college and like stays and lives in your hometown forever.
For too long.
And you see him at the local bar and he's like gotten married and divorced and remarried to whatever like high school biddy he had indoctrinated into his style of thinking over
but
the
now
course
they
of
both
the past
hate each
20
other.
years. Yeah. And then at the high school reunion, he's got a pot belly and a handlebar mustache, and she's like still somehow swooning for him. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So, yeah, he's exactly that, but then just so happens to have Animorph abilities before any of that comes to fruition. So maybe he'll become a better person over the course of the next 50 books. You got plenty of time, bud.
Marco, we believe in you. He does kind of redeem himself a little bit later on. We'll get to it. But essentially, kind of. Tobias, again, freaks out in his little brain. He decides to go hunt a rat, and he eats it, and then he freaks out. He's like, what did I just do? I just ate the rat, and I liked it. And he flies into the mall.
We've all been there, bud.
He flies into the mall. He's flying around, and he decides, you know what? There's a glass window up there. I'm just going to fly up and end it all. I'm just going to fly into this glass window, and I don't care what happens to me. Suicide attempt number 2. He's going towards the glass window. He's not stopping. And then you see a baseball hit the window and break it. So Tobias ends up just flying through the window. And it turns out Marco was the one that threw the baseball to break open the glass so Tobias could get out without hurting himself. So, all right, Marco,
hell yeah,
that was a pretty good move. I'll give you that.
Yeah. But he's a guy's guy, you know? He's for the boys.
He looks out for the boys.
Alpha male energy. Yeah. But yes, he saves Tobias's life, and I think again, this is right shortly thereafter. This is like the full circle conversation, I think, with Rachel, where it really starts to sink in. You know, you haven't lost yourself, just because you sort of hit your proverbial rock bottom. But not to mention, though, at some point in this, before that conversation really takes place, he also goes on basically a bird bender.
Yes.
Where he's just for several days just missing living the bird.
Doesn't talk to anybody, doesn't see any of his friends, kind of hangs out with the Hawk Lady, but not really, goes hunting. Yep. And going back to this conversation with the second conversation with Rachel, he's talking about killing to eat versus killing for power. And he's like, that makes me a monster. I'm killing to eat. And she's like, well, Tobias, this is your nature. You have to do this to survive. You know, she's like, the Yeerks, they just want to enslave other races. You know, they don't care. They just do it for power. That's what makes them wrong. You have to do it to survive, and that's how your nature is. For them, they just want to conquer everybody. So... yeah, really interesting and very mature conversation about the difference of, you know, not everything's black and white. You have to take the context of how things are and distinguish for yourself what justifies the actions that you're taking. And I think it was a really, really lovely conversation that she had with him. And I'm glad K.A. Applegate put it in this book, because I thought that was, very mature way to deal with a hard topic like this, especially Tobias freaking out and doesn't know what to do with himself anymore, essentially.
Yeah, it felt like the first moment where the series really slows down to address something that I think has been weighing on the audience or the reader's mind for the entire duration, which is, what is the actual cost? What is the emotional cost of having these abilities? And here you're able to see it far more vividly, because the cost is way more prescient, obviously, in what Tobias is dealing with versus what the other kids have to deal with. But it also just ties so richly and thematically back to, I think, what it means to be human, what it means to be a teenage kid. And that's why I'm so impressed with it in particular, because I think good science fiction or good fantasy writing, it all complements real life. It's never about the science fiction world that we're existing in. It's never about the fantasy world that we're existing in. These are things that ultimately, if the author has done their job right, these are backdrops. These are things that are allowing us to talk about more prescient, thematic, emotional moments that speak more to the core of who human beings are now than they do to who human beings are in the distant future or in the medieval past or what have you. So I really appreciated this whole section of the book. This felt to me, it's the section that I think we have the least to say in regards to what the actual plot is. But it's the section that I feel the most artistically invigorated by. So
yeah, and it's also talking about, you have this power now. What is your responsibility? You know, how are you going to responsibly use it in a way to help to achieve this task that essentially has been thrust upon you? How do you rise above these circumstances to keep moving forward despite setback after hardship and hardship? I mean, those are things that we've seen in millions of stories throughout tons of movies throughout all of human history, but it never really gets old because there's always some different way to approach it. And I just love that for Tobias.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, so they decide, okay, well, since this ship is sucking up this lake, they got to get fish in there, right? So let's just morph as fish. And I thought they did it in a really stupid way because they said, let's get up super early in the morning before all the Yeerks are going to get there. Let's go fishing until we catch one fish, and then we'll morph that fish and wait for the ship to suck us up. So the timing has to be perfect. I thought, okay, so 2 of them have osprey morphs. So ospreys are a type of bird. They fish. That's like what they're excellent at. They have giant claws. They have great eyes. They're huge. They just stick their feet in. They grab a fish that they see, and then they bring it back to shore. Not that it's the easiest thing in the world, but I think that would be a lot quicker than sitting with a fishing pole in their hands, waiting to
None
catch
of them
a fish.
fishers at all. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I also think it would have just been more clever in as well. I would say because we haven't talked about our section for how we would adapt this book yet, but just to get this one idea out of the way now before I forget that it exists. But one of the most, I think, important changes that I would make to the series as a whole, just because I think it raises the stakes for like no other purpose than that. I think that one animal equates to one morph. Is a rule I would add. I don't think that once someone has morphed a particular animal, that another person should be able to touch the same animal and be able to morph into it. Now, granted, I think you could. So, like, if there's 2 cats, one person touches one cat, one person touching another cat. That's fine. But solely, like, you can't both touch the same cat and get the morph. I think that whatever the DNA is that we're taking from it is there's only so much. That would be like a finite amount. That's something I would just add.
Yeah.
Because I think it would make the whole fish thing more interesting as well, because then it's like, oh, we have 2 people who are ospreys. We have one person who grabs this fish, brings it back to shore. We're morphing. The other person kind of loses themselves in their animal instincts a little bit and eats the fish. And then it's like, oh, well, we're running out of time. We need, we need, get your shit together, kind of thing. So it's just a little subtle change that I think would kind of add some momentum, but also kind of guarantee more morphs for more animals. I think that's
super interesting, and that would also explain why Jake acquires the tiger, but Marco doesn't. Why Marco acquires the gorilla and Jake doesn't. It would give him a lot more reason of like, we need diversity. We can't all be the same thing. That's a great idea. Good job, Gianni. Give yourself a pat on the back for your thoughts.
Thanks, guys. You know what I mean? This is what all those moody teenage years were all about. It's just so I could have good ideas on this podcast. But yeah, so they finally are able to get this fish. Finally able to kind of put this plan into action. They go up through this little water spout thingy-majiggy.
Well, do you remember how they do it? Because I think it's kind of like...
What?
It takes them so much time.
Tobias takes them like
one by one, as in their fish morph, because they're afraid of coming, because the Yeerk squad are coming in the area and they're going to be swarming it in minutes, and so they didn't want to be humans spotted by the cave. And if they morph fish, they can't fish flop their way from the cave into the lake. I'm like, why didn't you just get into the lake? Everybody gets under the surface of the lake.
Dungeons and Dragons ass plan I've ever heard of, because it was like, oh, you're just walking me through all of my terrible ideas that I've ever done in Dungeons and Dragons right now.
Can you just roll for dexterity for me, please?
Yeah. Make a perception check. Natural 1. I don't know. Maybe they see you, maybe they don't. I have no idea. Good luck.
So they just decide Tobias is going to go in and out of the cave as they morph fish, carry them as fish, throw them in the water. Not suspicious at all, even though Hork Bajir and one of the park rangers are like, that's weird that red-tailed hawk keeps flying back and forth out of the cave carrying the same fish each time. That's mildly suspicious, but I guess I shouldn't worry about that.
Right.
Anyway, continue, Gianni. They get sucked up into the ship.
Yeah, so then they get kind of stuck.
Yes,
Like,
trapped.
there's a sort of I can't really I may have failed to have the words to really describe it, but there's some sort of like
There's
shaft
like a grate.
that they're unable to get past in their fish morphs, and also I would presume you would just drown if you went back into your human form at this point.
Yeah.
So now they're on the clock. And also, definitely
they're
going to be
trapped
stuck in the shaft for forever.
Yeah, in some kind of tank or like some kind of box with like a grate over the top. Because I think they do morph back into humans because they're running out of time. And so, Visser 3 shows up.
Give Tobias like a heartfelt goodbye.
Oh my God. Rachel's like,
it's
Tobias.
Like pretty awful.
She's like, we can't get out.
It's like pretty harrowing.
Do something.
We're gonna
do
die
anything.
In here. Yeah.
Like we're all dead.
But so yeah, Visser 3 shows up and makes everything chaos because pretty quickly he's able to kind of say like, oh, that like Tobias, you're an Andalite kind of thing. Like he immediately has the thought that clearly that bird is not a normal bird, and everything is going completely wrong in this very moment. And much like the last book, everything pops right the fuck off all at once. I can't even like the actual string of events. So he sees the female hawk at a certain point, right?
Yeah, he's like, this is her territory, so be careful, Yeah,
so then she somehow gets swept up into this whole thing. The ship starts to take off. I mean, I'm glossing over so many moments that you're just going to have to, like, intercede in here. But, like, the ship starts to take off. I can't even remember. How did they get out of the shaft? So I'm, like, blanking on...
Tobias is sitting on top of the ship. So Visser 3 can't shoot him because he would damage the ship. And he doesn't want to damage the ship. So then he sends Taxons and Hork-Bajir on top of the ship to, like, shoot him with the little Dracon beams or Dracon beams. I don't know how to say it.
Right.
Whatever. Laser guns. They got laser guns that can disintegrate Tobias.
Dude. That's all you need to know.
And so Tobias is like, well, all my friends are dead. I might as well be dead too. So he grabs a gun from one of the Taxons and he shoots a hole in the ship as big as it possibly can be. And I think through this hole, the water comes out that was sucked up from the lake. And then he sees his friends falling out of the hole in their human forms. And he's like, guys, you gotta morph into fish real quick. Visser 3's here. It's gonna be crazy. It's crazy. And so they get out and the
ship starts going out of control. And then it runs into... like a bug fighter or something.
Yes.
But this is where I got lost because I was like, where the hell did this ship come from? I was like, wait, I missed something, clearly.
It's Visser 3's blade ship. And I think his blade ship is always surrounded with 2 bug fighters for, like, protection.
That's what it was. Got it.
So I think this big Stingray water ship ran into a bug fighter. They both kind of explode and fall down the side of the mountain. And Tobias and his friends get away, but then Tobias notices while they're in the forest, like recovering and hiding from the Yeerks, he sees his female red hawk flying around and they shoot her and one of her wings disappears and she falls to the ground.
Devastating.
And Tobias is like,
I'll never fuck that bird. That sucks, yeah.
I'm never gonna have bird sex.
We've all had the thought. There's a bird in everyone's life, and if that bird goes down, immediately everybody's all had the thought, like, damn, I'm never gonna get to fuck that bird. That sucks.
Look, I think Tobias is just prejudiced against people with disabilities. The bird just lost one wing. That's it.
Oh, the bird's alive?
Well,
I thought it was dead for sure.
They shot her. One of her wings completely disintegrated and she fell to the ground. And then, like, later on, I think, like, the next day, Rachel's like, should we go back for her? I know you liked her. We can make a burial for her. And he's like, no, she should die in the forest. Animals are going to come eat her, and that's the way it should be because that is nature. That's how nature works. We can't be out there to help every single animal that ever gets hurt that we're attached to. That's just not possible. The way that nature happens, she is likely dead from the wound. She's probably bled out, essentially. She can't fly, she can't eat, she's going to die, and that's how it should be. So let her return back to the forest, let the animals eat her, and we continue moving forward. Which, again, another very mature insight from Tobias of, like, accepting these things happen and we can't really do anything and it wouldn't be right for us to interfere in this situation. And he kind of starts to more come to terms with himself accepting that hawk part of him now and being like, yes, I'm a hawk. Yes, I'm a boy. And I'm just flying out in the sky doing my best. And that's kind of where the book ends.
Right.
Which is, you know, kind of, it's almost hopeful. It's like bittersweet in a way.
I will say now kind of in retrospect, it's like, because yes, there's not a lot that happens with this plot, and it's a pretty silly plot in the grand scheme of things. This is like the first time though that it does feel like, oh, we kind of got a win a little bit. Like we destroyed like a bug fighter. Like we did a little bit. We did it good. So like I guess there's progress in that. So
yeah, it's like they did damage a big ship that was carrying water and air to whatever Yerk base. So they don't have that anymore. So sure, that puts a dent in their plans. They just got to figure out where they were taking all that stuff. So in terms of a TV episode, what would we change? What would we keep? What would you do, Gianni? What would you do?
So apart from that change that I would make to the series as a whole, which I would obviously sort of do at the beginning. Again, I have to preface this by saying I've only read up to this point in the book series, so there's assumptions that I can make, but none of them are based on anything that's factual as of yet until I actually read the rest of the books. So take this with a grain of salt. But what I would change for certain is because there's like a passing line that kind of establishes what's happening with Tobias's family, which is to say that he comments that when his parents died, his aunt and his uncle were already split up, and they both currently think that he is at the other's house.
And they live across the country from each other.
Yeah, so he's like, I'm not sure how long that'll hold up, but that's the story right now. And so that kind of explains away why no one has really asked after Tobias, and that is just so Applegate can kind of move on with the plot that she wants to talk about rather than getting hung up on the plot that she doesn't. Makes perfect sense. If I were to do this book adaptation, I definitely would address the things with his family more head on, which is to say that I would have Tobias constantly in his downtime looking over his family members who are in town and watching to see if they have any sort of recognition that Tobias is not there.
Yeah. Or even...
I think that you could have...
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, even like in parts where he's like in his own angsty feelings and all that, he can think back to... He can have like flashbacks, like memory flashbacks of growing up with his aunt and uncle, going to his parents' funeral, seeing like maybe the funeral of his parents dying significantly changed both his aunt and his uncle to the point they don't want to interact with him anymore because it's too painful. Just something.
Absolutely.
We can jump back and forth, and that can also help pad the runtime with all this character development and like explanation without needing like any narration or anything like that. But I really like that idea of like him going and checking on them and seeing like, do they miss me? Are they doing anything? Like what's happening?
Yeah. And I think you can handle it one of two ways. You could either outright change how they're addressing the situation and just have like a new supporting character that is very active in trying to find Tobias, despite never really caring about him before. I think there's something interesting there. I think it's equally interesting though if Tobias is constantly sort of looking upon the situation, it's just like, really? Like, you don't
Yeah.
you don't feel anything for me?
Yeah.
Like, it hasn't clicked at all?
You know what would be messed up? Is if
Yeah, go
they
ahead.
adopted another child and they treated him with
Jesus
love.
Christ.
That would be horrible. Just,
That's awful.
I mean, it's only been a few days that they've had these powers, so it hasn't been like weeks
Yeah.
and weeks and weeks, but like, that would be bad.
I would do it with a dog or something. That's 'cause
Oh.
that's kind of fun, I think.
Yeah.
But the only
Anyway.
other guaranteed change I would make is one of his parents has to have committed suicide, because I think it makes
Yeah.
some of his suicidal tendencies in this book hit so much harder.
Yeah.
If there's a sort of history of him kind of getting permission sort of posthumously from his one of his parents in that way.
Yeah.
I think that's something really fun and interesting. The sort of like, maybe, I don't know how I feel about it, types of changes would be like combining some of the events of the second book with this book. I think that there's something to the plot of this book that feels very inconsequential. But if you tied some of the elements of it to the events of that second book, where it's like there's this whole like kind of climatic thing at this whole construction event or whatever, and just have the climax just tie directly into the climax of this book,
Yeah.
while you're also, sort of dealing with a lot of the sort of Tobias things while jumping back and forth between character perspectives. Again, that's one of those ones that I'm not really sure how I feel about that change specifically, because it really is dependent on how episodic the series is going to continue to be moving forward. Right now, we're in a place where all of the books have like a very procedural format. None of them are really going to break the mold, and none of them are going to move the needle on the overarching plot. But all of them are going to have like the same kind of cold open, the same kind of generic plot structure throughout, where we're sort of building blocks to whatever this climatic event is at the end. If that's going to keep consistent, then maybe it just makes more sense to just do a very faithful adaptation to each of the episodes moving forward.
Sure.
But I think that because the plot of this one is so insignificant, and the character moments are so significant, I would restructure the episodes and really just combine the events.
Yeah.
Jump between the character perspectives. Don't have to feel married to one episode, one character as a protagonist.
Sure.
I think that's a change I would want to implement, but it would really depend on how the rest of the series is going to go moving forward.
True. Yeah. I think that's a really good idea, especially, yeah, there are some like TV episodes where they're just like nothing episodes, or they're just like bottle episodes where everything takes place in one room and nobody leaves the room. You can have stuff like that. It's better to do those things far and few between, because it gets boring noticeably.
Right.
So I do think that is a really good idea, because yeah, there were some cool things that happened in the last book, but it did kind of feel like a little more padded out plot wise, of like, I need to get to just over 100 pages in my contract, so
Yes.
let me replay the events like this, and put all this extra tension building stuff in here that doesn't necessarily need to be here. I think
Right.
that's a really great idea. I'm trying to think if there's any other ideas that I had that I didn't really talk about. I don't think so. I think just fixing some of the dumb stuff, like catching the fish properly and having them morph in the water and be like, how long can they hold their breath before they get gills,
Yeah. Or if it's gonna be a demonstrably bad idea like that, then let's be a little more meta textual about it. Let's maybe address it like more head on. Let's maybe have like a more upfront conversation.
Yeah.
You have Marco as a resource for that character dynamic already. If Marco, like, let's heighten Marco's intelligence in the adaptation a little bit so that he can make the points that the audience may already be making themselves. You get good levity out of that. You get a really good comedic dynamic out of that. If they're literally stuck in the shaft and it's like, well, now what? And
Yeah.
it's,
It's
like that's funny.
I don't know.
Before we get into the high stakes, like adrenaline tension filled, I think we might die here. That's a cool beat to have, you know? So I think, if you're going to have awful plans, let's tell the audience,
let's
like,
acknowledge.
The writers know this is awful.
Yes. Yeah. I remember in some season they did that with Lost for a few episodes. I know you still haven't seen the show, which is a crime. But But there were a couple episodes where like one of the characters would say something and the other, and I was like, what does that mean? And then immediately afterwards the other character was like, what does that mean? And I'm like, yes, oh my god, yes, because it makes it fun, because it also makes the audience feel like we get it, this is complicated, or this is a stupid idea, just stick with us, we're gonna take it somewhere. And that makes the plot a bit more believable. It makes it feel a bit more lived in, a bit more relatable in terms of and realistic.
And I think it helps the audience trust characters as well. Especially a character like Marco, where you already know there's going to be some division in how people are going to perceive him just based on the sort of out-of-pocket shit that he says. It helps to have that character then speak for the audience at times, because then the audience is going to inherently be like, he's a little off the cuff and a little blunt, but he does say what we're thinking. So there's some inherent trust there. There's and that trust just breeds sort of faithfulness in whatever that character's going to do moving forward.
Yeah, and within all these episodes, there's no reason why he can't grow into a better, more mature person. I mean, it's been mentioned a couple times about his past, where his mom drowned and his dad has been depressed this entire, like 2 years ago, I think she drowned, and they never found her body, so they weren't able to have a proper funeral, and so the dad's been depressed this entire time. So that does give his character a little more gravitas for the situation. So you can kind of understand why he'd be like, I got jokes, because he's dying inside, essentially, without his mom.
And there's nothing more relatable than that.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope as the series continues on, like I said, I've only read into like probably the early 40s. And that was like years ago. I don't remember what happens past like maybe book like 6 or 7 maybe.
Oh wow.
I just remember little bits here and there. But there are a few things that stick out in my mind. But I do hope we get to see a gradual progression of these characters, kind of like in the Harry Potter books. Not a J.K. Rowling stan, but just as an example, the first 2 books, easy kind of kids books. They're easy to get through, and you're like, okay, these are kids books. And then the 3rd book hits, and you're like, wait a second, everything just got way more complex. Family relationships, maturity, different emotions and hormones and all that stuff going around. Everything gets immediately more intense and confusing.
She also introduces the most important magic item in the series to never be talked about again in the 3rd book.
Which one is that?
It's like the time turner.
Oh yeah, oh my god.
Could have prevented the plot of all of the other books from happening if you actually use
also,
it.
like, how come nobody uses that ever? Like, is there only one in the entire universe?
No.
Like, where are the others? How is time not constantly being shifted? How do we know what reality is real? Gianni, these are real questions.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think about this all the time. And also not a huge Harry Potter fan. Sorry to burst everybody's bubble, but that's my stake in the ground, and I will stand on it.
I think that's absolutely understandable. So anyway, all right. So what do you hope comes up in the future for in this? I think the next book is Marco. Let me double check really quickly, because I want to make sure I'm correct.
I thought I was going to go girl, boy. So,
let me see. Hang on.
I would assume.
Let me go to.
I was expecting a Cassie.
Oh, okay. No, you're right. The next one is Cassie. Okay, so maybe Marco's after that. It's called The Message. What do you think the message is going to be?
Got it. Okay. So yeah, so far, I've had high expectations based on the titles of these books that have been very inconsequential. Like
very
the encounter,
vague.
I don't even know what the titular event is that denotes the encounter, but I don't even know.
Maybe he encountered the hawk.
I guess that's kind of my guess, but I don't like. So far, the titles have been very, very not tangent. Like
they don't
briefly related. So like I can't. My hope for the message is like, oh my god, they get a message from like an Andalite who's like, I want to help you or something. But I know it's not going to be that. It's going to be like literally like she got a note in her locker and like, hey, come see me. Talk to someone for 2 seconds.
Your dad loves you more than you will ever realize.
Yeah, like okay. But no, so I guess my expectations for a Cassie book, I mean, I want to keep the trend going. Obviously, I had said the encounter is my new bar for where I want character development to be with some of these protagonists. I think Cassie's maybe the one that we've gotten to know the least. Like, she's just kind of like really sweet.
The animal girl.
Knows a lot about animals. Yeah, she's just horse girl. So, I guess I just want to dissect her brain a little bit more. See, obviously, I'm expecting, unfortunately, more of that relationship with her and Jake, to expand on that. So that means I guess I have to see more of Jake, but hopefully he can redeem himself through her eyes or her perspective. I'm not gonna say that I'm expecting the fourth book to really move the needle on the grand plot here. But I would like to start seeing a more overarching plan start to at least plant the seeds of here, because the procedural stuff is fun, but so far, I don't think any of them have even tried to kind of even grapple or grasp the fact of like, where are we gonna, like, what are we actually doing here? We're just kind of like going with the flow of these moments. I would like to see at least a little effort be done. A little
more planning.
Just plant the seeds. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, but if we just get some tidbit of information with the message, then that can maybe influence where the series is kind of going to end up by book 10, then great. Then I'll be a happy camper. But that's really all my expectations have right now.
Okay. I will tell you, this does move the plot a little bit more, this next book.
Nice.
I'm not going to say how. I'm not going to say if you are correct or incorrect with any of your predictions, but I am going to say it is going to move the plot forward a little bit more. Oh, I want to say more, but I'm not going to. I don't want to ruin the surprise.
That's a teaser here in the business. That's what we call that right there.
Teaser. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the book where things kind of shift a little bit. So I remember this book. I'm excited for this book. I'm excited to hear your thoughts and go back through and relive it, essentially.
Hell yeah.
So,
all right, cool.
I'm excited. Well, everyone, thanks for listening to us at Morphin Buddies. If you would like to email us, you can send us an email. Any emails are welcome. Just don't be mean to us. We're sensitive. You can email... You can email us at morphinbuddies, that's morphinbuddies @gmail.com. You can send us nice things. You can send us constructive criticism. Ooh, I can't talk. So we've got that email set up, and we will be listening and looking out for emails. In the meantime, we hope to see your little ears just prepare themselves for our next episode of Morphin Buddies.
Morphin Buddies.